Hi, everybody. Welcome to Central Florida Beyond the Soundbite, the podcast that's covering politics and so much more up and down the I-4 corridor. Glad you're listening on the Spectrum News app or wherever else you're getting your podcast from. I'm Ibeth Brusual, being joined by political reporter Greg Angel.
A fresh start isn't a new place. It's a new mindset.
And speaking of fresh starts, congratulations to you. I said reporter, but he's been made a full-time anchor on Spectrum News 13, and we're very proud of you. You'll be working the evenings with Tammy Fields, but also covering our political content with us.
And still getting to hassle you and Gary Darling just as much.
I was hoping that would change, but darn it. No, I'm just kidding. We're really legit so proud of you. And political producer of all things everything here at Spectrum News, Gary Darling.
Hello.
Check that calendar. What? 2022 just around the corner. I cannot believe it. I really do now believe my grandmother. As you get older, things just start to go real fast.
Where did this last year go?
I don't know. Yeah. Last year and a half, we blinked. We can't believe it. You can't believe it. So what we're going to do this week is just take up just a few minutes of your time to talk about heading into a new year. What's on tap? What's on the horizon? And yes, to keep in good standing with the head honchos, what's going to happen in the political world in 2022? Lots of questions, lots of topics. COVID-19 has now been around for 2 years.
Can you believe that?
No, I can't.
We're talking about because we're talking about going into 2022.
So March
and all of 2021, we were talking about the effects of 2020. Now that COVID-19 showed up in December of 2019.
Because Washington State
and then Washington State. I remember the first case coming into the country.
Yeah, but the bleep, right. It didn't hit the fan till
March.
Like end of March.
Yeah.
It was March.
I always use the state shutdown in March around Labor Day or around I was saying Labor Day. I meant the Leprechaun Day.
St. Patrick's Day. Right. The Leprechaun Day. Happy Leprechaun Day, everybody.
No.
From here on out, I will never call it St. Patrick's Day.
It'll be Leprechaun Day. But do you remember that we had
the bars closed
on Leprechaun Day?
People were pissed because they were closing the bars downtown.
The bars on Leprechaun Day in 2020 were closed, but it was also the March presidential primary. Was that night.
Michael Bloomberg was in Orlando. We had interviewed him, and then we had the primaries and stuff. Mm-hmm. And it was just so surreal because it was like right after that.
It was the Friday before that all the bars and everything got shut down by the county, and then we moved. Then it started getting even more hardcore. But those 3 months leading up to that, December, January, February, that's when it was all starting to develop. And we would have these reports where it's like, there's been 3 new COVID cases in the state of Florida.
Yeah. Oh, gosh.
And then a couple of months later, it was the old hold my beer. Here, let's have a couple of hundred.
Congressman Charlie Crist, for example, he's a congressman from the St. Pete area. Former governor, he served one term as a Republican. When he left office, switched parties, became an independent, ran for Senate, lost to Marco Rubio. Mm-hmm. But here's the point. All these new people moving to Florida, his name recognition may not necessarily be there.
Right.
Former president is one thing, but former governor, how many former governors are still around?
I don't know. He's very charismatic. You've interviewed him many times. We've interviewed him many times. This guy can work a room.
Oh, yeah. And his supporters love him. But my point being is Florida today is not the same Florida when Charlie Crist was governor.
In another context, Ebeth, when you moved to Central Florida, who was the big time anchor on television?
It was on Channel 6. On Channel 9, it was Marty Salt. Mm-hmm. And over at Channel 2, Wendy Chioggi and some others. And Channel 6 was Annetta Wilson. But the main anchor was Mary Hamill.
Okay, I'm going to stop you right there. Greg, do you know all of those names?
Yes. Wendy?
No, I asked you, do you know all of those names?
Oh, no, not the last one.
And that is the problem that Charlie Crist is going to have, and Nikki Fried and Annette Taddeo, when you have all of these new voters coming into the state who have no history with the people that were here doing the power plays.
And I gotta
20,
say
30
his
years
name because he was number one in my book. Scott Harris,
Yeah.
of course.
Ben
late
Aykroyd
Scott
was
Harris.
the other great.
Ben Aykroyd, absolutely.
But-
Shannon Shep, the executive director at the Florida Department of Citrus, and Matt Joyner, the director of government affairs at Florida Citrus Mutual. Thank you both for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Ebeth. We were excited to be with you this morning.
Everybody loves orange juice. So let's set the stage before we get into the nitty gritty. Back before monumental growth, there were orange groves everywhere, as far as the eye could see, as I mentioned at the top of the podcast. Spectrum News 13's Julie Gorgata actually took a deep dive into this topic during an episode of Street Level, focusing on U.S. Highway 27 through the very center of the state. By the way, you can still catch that on the Spectrum News app. Was it just one catastrophic event, do you think, that changed the size of Florida's citrus industry, or did this happen gradually throughout the years? Shannon, let me start with you.
Well, I think it's been a series of different challenges throughout the years. In 1935, there was a group of Florida citrus growers that got together and said, hey, we should have this thing called the Department of Citrus so that we can research and regulate and market this great thing that we have, this great oranges and grapefruit. And down the road, they adopted quality standards and they figured out what kind of market we wanted to produce or what kind of product we wanted to produce to market and push out to consumers. Mostly back then it was oranges or juice, just squeezing them for juice. And I think the first thing that they realized early on was weather. Weather is the ultimate challenge to the Florida citrus grower or any farmer, actually. And so when you talk about freezes or hurricanes, hurricanes have been very detrimental. But really what we're facing right now is more of a pest and disease existential problem with the latest introduction of citrus greening, or HLB. It was found in 2005, and there has been no bigger challenge to this industry than citrus greening. Matt tells a great story about this too, and I'll let him chime in here.
Yeah, I see you nodding your head because you want to say something. I'm kind of standing up at attention because that was way down in my script for later on. But forget that. Let's go ahead and talk about it right now. So tell me more about this problem about the citrus greening, Matt.
Well, no doubt, citrus greening is the most difficult threat that this industry has ever faced, and frankly, any citrus-producing country around the world. And to your point, there was a time when this industry was almost 1 million acres strong, and we've seen obviously growth in the state of Florida that has encroached on some of the citrus producing areas. And so we are seeing a decline in acreage as a result of growth. But really, citrus greening, which has taken a toll on this industry in terms of production, is probably the single greatest thing that accounts for a lot of the consolidation of the industry that we're seeing over the last decade and a half.
I'm Ebeth Brusoil, morning anchor at Spectrum News 13 and anchor of Political Connections, being joined by political producer Gary Darling.
Hello.
Political reporter Greg Angel on assignment this week.
Of course, I always look forward to that because then I can jump in. Greg gives us the phrase of the day. I come in and give the better phrase of the day because I'm opinionated.
Because he's not here, and
That's
you
right.
can.
Yeah, too bad, Greg. You're not here, so I get to do it. Ready?
Go.
Upon us all, a little rain must fall. Just a little rain.
Who's that from?
The Rain Song by Led Zeppelin, 1973.
I should know that everything. But no, P.S., BTW, this whole thing of him giving these inspirational quotes, that was never scripted or...
Nah, he just started doing it.
He
Yeah.
just started doing his own, and I really dig it, even when he's not here, because you get to do it.
Right. Then I come in and subvert everything that he does. It's great. I personally enjoy it.
You get this wicked look on your face, too, when you do that. We miss you, Greg. Okay, let's continue now. It's the peak of hurricane season. So how does technology help when it comes to tracking the hurricanes? Not just now, but in the last couple of years. Plus, what government grants, if any, help with all of this? I know Gary is very enthused about getting going with the conversation.
Thank goodness we have somebody here to talk about it. Who is that, Ebeth?
That's the chief. Spectrum News 13 Chief Meteorologist Brian Carrick. Thank you so much for your time. I know you've got A lot of things going on in the Weather Center. Things are picking up. So we appreciate you pushing the pause button to talk to us in the podcast.
Yeah, no problem. You know what? I want to one up Gary's phrase of the day.
Oh,
Let's see if you're up to the challenge. Go ahead.
Bring it.
You can't shovel sunshine. Does that work?
That works. That's deep.
Yeah, that's okay.
Did you just make that up?
I just Greg is kind of in the room still. He's kind of giving me some
That's right.
inspiration.
He's not dead yet. Anyway, by the way, when I did write that in the script, the chief. Whenever I see Brian, all I can think of is he's the chief, right? And then all I can think of is Get Smart from 1965.
When he comes in, I do straighten up a little bit, and I don't want to joke around too much because, he's the jefe, he's the chief. Listen, so right around this time of year is what we know is the peak of hurricane season. But that's just a stat, and we want to break stuff down. You've never guaranteed that you'll have tropical activity on this particular day, on this particular month, but you get a ballpark idea of what's happening and what will happen, and always focusing on Florida, of course.
And especially this time of year, it only takes one storm to create issues, obviously. And this time of year, with it being around the peak of hurricane season, we typically would have at least one storm and sometimes numerous storms. But in any case, we're always watching the tropics because we can get storms outside of the typical hurricane season, which, by the way, runs June 1st through November 30th. Thank goodness here in Florida, we really don't see that activity outside the typical season. But right now, this time of year, this is when we typically see our highest number of storms.
And why is that?
We are starting to warm up the oceans. The oceans need to be at least 80 degrees. That sea surface temperature, at least 80 degrees. And so the oceans have started to warm. And depending on what's going on in the patterns, wind becomes a greater factor as the summer progresses as well, the season progresses. The winds aloft, if they're a little lighter, which this time of year they would be, depending on, like I said, an El Nino or a La Nina. El Nino is an unusual warming of the Pacific Ocean waters. It helps to keep us a little more in check here in the Atlantic. And the La Nina, which is a reverse of that. So we have the cooler waters in the Pacific, but we start warming up the Atlantic waters. If we're ENSO neutral, which means we're in a neutral pattern, the wind aloft is a little less severe and impactful. And with those sea surface temperatures, obviously, you need those ingredients to come together to get tropical activity.
It's never hard, by the way, for me to say niño or niña.
Yeah.
I can't roll my R's or any of that.
Don't worry, I've got you covered on that one. I have, family members when we were little, and they're like, niña. It's like, girl, please. I'm always baffled that when you see something brewing over in the coast of Africa, and then how could something so far away, right? Mm-hmm. Try and make it over here, and there's multiple things that could stop it. Terrain, the Saharan dust lately has been harmful to us when it's like near us, but then it's helpful because it breaks stuff up.
Isn't it crazy when you think about the dust storms in Africa?
It's nuts.
That are actually the severe weather or the thunderstorms in typical that are pushing the wind down and pushing all that sand back up into the atmosphere, and it's going up so high that it is carried all the way across that Atlantic basin. I mean, that is thousands of miles away. But when you get it up into the jet stream, that higher wind, as you go up into the air, that river of wind aloft carries it, and it does. It comes all the way across. What that does is it stabilizes the air. It dries it out. It cools it off, and that's not what a hurricane needs to breathe. So progressing that dust across the Atlantic basin is great for us, obviously health-wise.
It's like relating it to an engine. It's like a choke. You're choking the engine out.
Bingo. You are. You're choking the storm out. It's not able to breathe. It's not pushing that wind up. It's exactly what it is. And so without that dust, the atmosphere, it warms up. And so we start pushing that air up, and we get over the waters that are warmer in the Atlantic, and that's when those storms, they develop off the coast or along the coast and push all the way across because they have the fuel necessary for that long trek, and all depending on that steering flow as well.
Gary is not only incredible with coming up with Led Zeppelin quotes and giving analogies about cars, Gary's also a spreadsheet maniac.
Right.
He has a spreadsheet, I kid you not, for everything and everyone under the sun.
Yeah, and here's the one that we have for today.
Go for it.
Yeah, it's comparisons of hurricane seasons. Now, I came up with this a few years ago because our base of standard, the rule of thumb was 2004 was Charlie, Francis, and Jean and Ivan. And those were big deals for Central Florida. And then the year after 2005 is when we had like 348 storms. Okay, I'm exaggerating slightly. But
There's a lot.
no, there were. It was the juggernaut. That was like the season to, you compare everything against that. Until, of course, 2020, when we had 30 storms, and it broke all previous records. So here's the question for Brian. So is the volume of storms attributable to A, more activity overall, B, more activity detected with better technology, C, overzealous forecasters at the National Hurricane Center, D, all of the above, or E, something else?
Wow. Actually, I would say be the technology that's allowing us to see more of these storms, although the frequency does seem to be up as well, and that all plays into climate change. And so with climate change, we're going to see some more storms. We're going to see some bigger storms, a little deeper storms. But the technology over the past several years has really fueled the opportunity to see and name storms we might not typically see.
How so?
Well, say satellite, which is, we've got satellites up 22,500 miles above us looking down and scanning, and they're providing us very clear images of these storms as they're developing. Back, and I can't say exactly how long ago, but years ago, we didn't have that kind of satellite that was able to detect even down to what would be an eye of a storm. And so with the higher technology that we have, the satellites, and including buoy data, a number of buoys that have been added over the years, that's what helps us to detect these systems a little bit better. And so we're seeing storms that do get names, and we kind of shake our heads because it may be sitting in the north central Atlantic in just a fish storm, but the technology is allowing us to see that better, and that's why we're seeing more named storms.
I mean, you're talking about satellites. We didn't have satellites in space to look at weather until the 60s.
Right, exactly. So that technology in itself has really helped.
So before that, we had to rely on buoys and really data from ships at sea. And that was it.
And that was it.
And the ocean's kind of big.
And it is. It's huge. So you factor in that.
The ocean's kind of big.
Yeah,
It's ginormous.
Thank you, Campton Obvious.
As we were getting ready for this podcast, there was so much to consider and ponder. And when you stop and think about the big picture, I would say one of the most traumatic and gut-wrenching things that a family can endure is having one of their family members become the victim of a crime and, they disappear without a trace, or their assailant is never found or convicted. You've heard about these cases, right? And as days turn into weeks, that turn into months and years, the wounds never heal. That's just a fact. Several cases in Central Florida over the years are brought back to our attention, usually on yearly observances of that disappearance. Well, Spectrum News 13's Curtis McLeod, our watchdog reporter, has followed these cold cases and also talked to the law enforcement departments tasked with finding answers for these grieving families that are still years later in shock. Curtis, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you all for having me. I'm really, really honored to be here because I often listen to you guys, and it's great to be in the room with you all.
I know that you are up to your eyeballs in research. You have a very busy schedule when you are basically tasked with researching all of these cases. So we appreciate you pushing the pause button on researching so you could join us for this. So we have a lot of cases to go through. And one of the first ones, I tell you, let's just start with the Jennifer Kesse case. I'm looking down at these notes, Gary and Greg and Curtis, going, I feel like it was yesterday, but it's not. It was 2006.
Right. And, going through some of the old video and everything that we have here, at the station and just really getting involved. And that's the thing with me with these cases. I get really into it. And I'm like, okay, you feel as if you know these individuals, these people, especially talking to their family members and talking to the people that knew them. And in regards to Jennifer Kesse, sat down with Drew and Joyce Kesse in their home and just really had a conversation with them. And you can feel how they feel in a sense. And I mean, myself, I'm a father, and you just really, really, really know that. I think to myself, I'm like, oh gosh, if something ever happened to one of my boys, I just don't know what I'd do. And we're talking talking years here. I know where I was in 2006, and now thinking at what has happened in my life in that time, a lot has happened. And when we did our cold case on the Jennifer Kesse case, and we kind of, our starting off point was the evidence that the family wanted from OPD. You know, they sued Orlando Police Department to get that evidence, and they got that evidence and got their own team of investigators to kind of go through, you know, that evidence, launching their own investigation. And that's kind of where our reporting started.
And because of that, there's been some of these revelations in the last couple of years, the family holding on to hope that perhaps there could be some revelations. If they could only know what OPD knew, what did they have in the case file? But take us a little bit back to the beginning, if you could. Jennifer Kesse, this is a case that received a lot of attention, not only here locally, but nationally as well. Walk us through, because there's some key locations involved. Walk us through kind of who Jennifer was and how it is she became this high-profile disappearance case.
Well, you know, it started, you know, Jennifer Kesse graduated, and she was at UCF, and she graduated from UCF and got a job in Orlando. Leaving her home, she was from the Tampa area, leaving her home and said, hey, I'm going to forge my way on myself and do my own thing, working in kind of top-level finance with a I don't want to call it like a hotel, I can say the hotel industry. And, you know, was, you know, living her life. She had just graduated, kind of like the prime. We were all excited, you know, getting out on our own. And, you know, she had and I remember Drew Kesse telling me this, she had just bought this place and we had helped her renovate it. And she was really, really excited, you know, and so excited to be on her own, and had, you know, had her new job and everything. And, you know, she was, you know, as described by her family, the life of the party and loved to go out and have fun. And, you know, there one day, you know, she'd just come back from a trip with her boyfriend and, you know, she had just come back and, you know, got up the next morning, you know, took a shower like she normally did, laid her clothes out on the bed and got ready to go to work and vanished that morning. And this happened in broad daylight, early morning hours near the mall at Millennia.
I want to bring something up that every time we cover the story, because there's an anniversary approaching or what have you, and I have to look at the monitor and we play the video. This is on a personal level. Every time we play the video, there seems to be like a parking area at the Mosaic, the apartment where she disappeared, and you see that shadow. It appears to be someone slim, tall, and it's over to the corner, and you see a very slow moving, and you go, who is that? What is that? What's the role?
Just to clarify, that is where they found her car.
Which is not the Mosaic. You're right. It was down the street.
Well, they found her car, and that's where the shadowy person
Thank you for clarifying that, yeah.
Not necessarily where she disappeared. That is still
Which describes the lay of the land, Gary, now that you bring that up, because people think, oh, it's, you know, and it's a stone's throw away from the mall at Millennia, very ritzy mall. Of course, fast forward now, there's so much construction that has happened since then. But back then, it is a very clear area of fancy mall. And then just a very short drive later, there's some sketchy areas of town that you don't want to be caught at.
Absolutely. You know? There is.
So let me start with Gary, or any one of you freaks. What's your favorite Thanksgiving memory?
Okay, I grew up in upstate New York.
Okay, cold.
Right on the shore of Lake Ontario, Oswego, New York. So that means anytime after, I mean, the first snow sometimes would fly on at the very end of September, like September 25th, you'd see a flurry in the air. And like, there's a reason that I came to Florida. I'm going to sneak in a separate thing in here too before we get to Thanksgiving, because it's the holidays for real, but like you kind of count Halloween in. Back in 1970, I was like 5 years old. Do the math, people. One of the great things was you had It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown on TV.
Yes, iconic.
I had a set of these books that were at that point, there were only 5 specials that had been made, and Great Pumpkin was one of them. And then what they had is they had artwork with all of from the classic scenes in the show. One of those scenes was Snoopy coming up, silhouetted in front of the moon, and Linus and Sally are out in the pumpkin patch, right?
Yes.
My mom took that picture, took some graph paper, and basically traced it and then scaled it up and made this gigantic artwork on like foam core or whatever, some kind of
Wow.
board that we could fill our picture window with that scene.
Oh, how cool.
And then my dad would take a spotlight out front, wire it up so it was it was illuminating the picture window. So on Halloween, we had the big Charlie Brown,
That was
the
cool.
Linus and the Great Pumpkin Patch. And we just recently found that artwork. And I'm going to bring it to Florida. The thing is like, I don't think anybody has picture windows anymore. So what we're going to do is I'm going to get a big piece of plywood or 5/4 board and mount it on there, seal it up, and then set it out.
So
Where-
is this something that's like in the room, so when you peer through the window, or something that's like in the window?
Yeah, what's a
In
picture
the window. So basically, it was you were putting a big thing of cardboard up on the window, so you couldn't see in at all. But it was like this big, gigantic display.
I mean, we have projectors, so we do like the reverse.
This is old school. Anyway, so that was
Honey, I grew up in Puerto Rico. We didn't have any of these things that you're talking about. But wait,
that was-
back up.
yeah.
Where did you find this? And where, what?
it was just in storage. It was in the
the
dryer
farm?
room. Yeah, no, not
the barn?
It wasn't in the barn. It was in the house, but it was just tucked away somewhere. It's like,
But
oh,
tucked
this
away could have been like disintegrated with holes. It was
Yeah.
in good condition.
seems to be. Yeah.
I cannot wait to see it.
All right, so that was Halloween. Let me move on to Thanksgiving.
Okay,
since that's
I
what we're
love
talking
that.
about. Upstate New York, Oswego, snow flies. 1978. We used to go to our aunt's house for there was my dad, he had a brother and a sister, and they all had like 5, 6, 15 children, whatever it was. And we were like the youngest ones. It was me and my sister. And so they had this big, gigantic family holiday gathering. And it was crazy because it was like a big house, 48,000 kids running all over the place.
love that.
Whatever.
Love it.
Right. Big fireplace going. There was a pool table. My grandfather was holding court. It was great. 1978, 11 inches of snow on
Ooh.
Thanksgiving morning.
11.
Inches. Now, did that stop us from making that drive? No, sirree, it did
You're
not.
from New York.
Yeah.
No.
I think the other thing was the deep frying of the turkey. I've never heard of that
I've
before.
never done that
until I came
before.
to Florida.
No,
Yeah.
I'm not risky enough to do that, and I still have all 5 of digits on my fingers.
I hear
and
it's
I'd rather-
delicious. I haven't had it.
I've
I hear
never-
it's very delicious.
I've never had it.
The trick is do not drop a frozen turkey into boiling
Do not
oil.
overfill your container. I cannot tell you
And-
how many times we've done stories. These are serious stories with local fire departments giving the warning, and they also do like a show and tell video of what not to do. They also do it.
Yeah.
Also do it in your driveway. Never indoors.
Yep.
Do not overfill it. Do not do it with a frozen turkey. You can
Nope.
Google this and it'll come up.
Yeah, it's amazing. People are like, "How come the news always have to do those stories every year?" Well,
Well,
because
because-
people.
No, because
we're
it's very
not
dangerous.
doing it because people have learned. We're doing it because people have. The point comes every Thanksgiving inevitably. A few years back, I put on YouTube a video, the scene from Addams Family Values, where there is a Thanksgiving play that is taken over by Wednesday Adam. And that's how I know it's truly Thanksgiving, because clearly everybody Googles that on Thanksgiving. So all of a sudden my email still
I've never heard of this
goes
until right
ding,
now.
ding, ding, ding,
I've
ding,
never
ding,
heard
ding.
of this until right now. What are you talking
Addams
about?
Family Value.
Yeah.
Just watch it.
Go to the YouTube.
I
It
mean, I
must
was
be
dressed
there.
as
I get the
Morticia for Halloween. I should probably know this.
Looked fantastic, by the way, might I say.
People were freaking out, and I did not have plans to go to this party.
No. The best part was
saw
Beth posting on social media and telling everybody how difficult it was for her to remain in character and not crack a smile. That was hilarious.
I wanted to smile, and people were coming up to me and like, "Oh my God, Beth!" And I'm like, "Hello." Like I was just not. It was really, really hard, but I enjoyed transforming into
What was the
someone
hubby?
else.
Was he?
He dressed as like Phantom of the Opera, and I wanted him to dress like Gomez or the tall. What's the tall guy that goes?
Lurch.
Fester, Lurch.
Lurch,
Wait,
because
which
my-
one's Fester?
Uncle Fester.
Uncle Fester's
That's
the-
right.
yeah.
And then the hand.
I had
Thing.
a hand. I had a severed
Thing.
hand. Yeah.
Oh my God. I could have just put on like black spandex and then just been hand.
I don't think I ever need to have that visual in my head anymore.
And with that vision in our heads and with spandex, we will take a break. Back in a minute. This
Please
is
come
Central
back.
Florida Beyond the Soundbite. Please come back. We won't talk about spandex. An exclusive audio presentation from Spectrum News 13.